I'm Carl Munson. Welcome to the Mastery series.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you very much. What is? Tell us more about the Mastery series. But there I go again. I've turned the interview around to you, which is something we were talking about before we came on air,
Don't
wasn't
worry,
it?
I'll be spinning it back to you in no time. It's good that you ask, actually, because in a very brief nutshell, the Mastery series is about inquiring. It's an inquiry into people who've been through their shit. They've come out the other side and solidified. They've rooted, and they've actually got something true that they're bringing forward, that they want to gift to the world, that they're offering to the world. It's coming out of their mastery, but it's come through doing the hard yards, through personal crisis, tragedy, breakdown, illness, you name it. And it's that cauldron of cultivation of a true self, the embodiment. And then whatever comes out as their gift to the world, their beingness, their service, their product, their invention, whatever it is, their gift of presence and how that affects the world. So welcome.
I feel I can really relate to that and feel honoured to have been invited on that basis, and hope I can live up to that as I hear it as an invitation.
Yeah. So tell me what is it that you are emerging as, or we were discussing just before we kind of went live here, coming out. What's happening in the world of Carl Munson?
Well, this is really useful for me to say this publicly. And yes, the coming out, generally a term used for people who are coming out as gay. I really think there's something powerful in the idea of everybody coming out as who they really are. And a seam of work that I found myself facing now is the idea of what it is to be a real man. And I'm delighted and terrified by taking on that conversation, but it is about me coming out as a real man in, I think, a really interesting time to even dare to say that, for me personally, but just generally in society.
So what is coming out as a real man? What would you say is your understanding of being a real man?
Well, if I can start by saying it's been a really too long a process. And I wrote something about this just recently, about how all my ideas about being a man, as a younger man, as a boy, came out of fear and limitation. And it's just in this last little while, for a number of circumstances and reasons and all those wonderful things that happen when you, this idea of when you step one step towards providence, it steps one step towards you, kind of meets you halfway. In being a bit terrified and curious and outrageous about it, I feel like I've had a lot of support come my way. And instead of being a man from fear and limitation, which I think afflicts a lot of men, I am talking now about being a man on my own terms. So really, literally, a real man is a man who's being real. And it's really an affront, isn't it, to all we believe about what a real man is, because it is made of stereotypes and it's made of what you should be. And so much of what you should be comes out of fear and limitation, as I experienced as a younger man. But there's something really amazing in coming out as the real you. And within this context, I'm speaking of my experience, which is to be a man, a family man, a heterosexual man, family man, father, and of a certain age, which then puts upon me, well, I'm putting on myself a responsibility to be some sort of elder in the making. So it's all of those things, but really the key thing there, what is a real man, is a man who dares to be real. Now, that is really unlike a lot of stereotypes we've received, I think.
What were the formative experiences that have shown you how to be real, have cracked you open, or have shown you what not being real is? What have those been?
And being punched in the face is quite a good one. And I'll explain that because this recent sort of crystallization or realization of this journey has come from asking the question myself, and so you kind of fire these posts into, or I fire these posts into Facebook to try and get an answer from the generalized oracle that is social media. So I was asking things like, what is it to be a man? What is masculinity? What is it to be an elder? What are the rites of passage that help men grow up? And actually, one of the things that started me off on that, I was on a flight. I think I was either at Bristol Airport or Lisbon Airport, and I saw a group of blokes who were clearly, I think, returning from a weekend away, a lads' weekend, and we all have an idea of what that means. And I looked at them, and I thought they were probably a little bit younger than me, but I was actually a bit appalled and sickened that these men were like wearing baseball caps and DJ headphones and branded teenager clothes. And I was thinking, this is a bit weird. I mean, you know, no offense to them as individuals, but culturally, what is going on when like middle-aged men are dressed like teenagers and are in a hotel departure, an airport departure lounge, a bit worse for wear? You know, they didn't strike me as people I would want to look up to. They'd had a nice weekend away, and maybe that's, I'm a bit being a bit harsh and judgmental. Everyone's got a right to go away for a nice weekend. I'm not proposing a law against that, but I'm also seeing in that the absence of like really impressive men, you know, and there's, you know, yesterday, to sort of bring it right up to date with my oracling of Facebook, you know, I posted up a list of 10 things that I was giving up to grow up. And what I found is people was like, you know, well, what do you want to grow up for? And there's a resistance in our culture to, I mean, you know, growing up's been given a bad name, there's no doubt about it, and it's used as a kind of term of bringing people into line, isn't it? You know, you need to grow up. So clearly it's not, the listening for it is poor and judgmental and negative, but the question is still there for me. So who are the elders? Who are the men I can look up to? So that's part of it. And so, you know, when talking about being punched in the face, one of my, in retrospect, what I realized as a really useful formative experience was accidentally creating a boxing club. And I used to work in a charity for people with a range of disabilities. And I thought, there's one particular lad actually who I experienced as being very aggressive. And I thought, in a kind of old school way, well, what would be the best outlet for this young man to channel his aggression? And, you know, so an aggressive sport, you might say. So I knew a fantastic guy called Chris Rattenbury, who's a boxing coach in Torquay. And I said, Chris, would you mind coming and just doing a little presentation, and we'll get a few people together and we'll see if we can start a boxing club. And as it turns out, the lad who I had in mind he came to the presentation, but didn't take it up. I think, you know, it was, for whatever reason, it wasn't his cup of tea. It didn't work out, but we started a boxing club anyway. And I think there was a moment where I got hurt in a confrontation, in a sparring situation. And I realized how much I had avoided that in my life. And you might say, well, that's really sensible and wise, Carl, to avoid being punched in the face. Good. That's a clever evolutionary step. And on one level, of course it is. But at the same time, men, I think, are so without that sort of challenge that summons up their blood and summons some of the qualities of what I would say are kind of vital yet repressed parts of masculinity in our culture, that it was a really useful experience, and it's been put into context with me ever since. I'm doing work with a guy called David Schofield, I think you know, and his background for the basis of his training is martial arts. So he's no stranger to being punched in the face and probably every other part of his body. And from that, I think something useful can flow. So I'm not suggesting that fight clubs and hooliganism and hurting people and violence for violence sake, but I think there's something tied up in this avoidance of pain and shock and endurance. These masculine things, or things that I think men might benefit from, have been we've conspired to hide them away because we're a bit embarrassed about them, for one thing. And there's also, you know, there is the grand plot against the alpha male, which I've been part of. You know, I didn't like my received stereotypes. My dad was quite a bloke of a bloke. You know, he was an ex-copper. He didn't mind having a tussle and a confrontation. You know, in fact, there was a lot of his meaning and being was coming from that place. So I grew up thinking that's not actually that functional or nice, you know. So I threw that whole baby out with the bathwater, and now it's coming full circle again. And for me, all of those kind of things that I've rejected, you know, alpha male physicality, alpha male aggression, alpha male sexuality, alpha male communication or lack of it, they've all come back full circle to me because I am their age now and I need to make sense of it.
It's really interesting because Iron John, that great book of the
Hmm.
men's movement, is it Robert
Robert Bly.
Robert Bly?
Yes.
I once saw him speaking. Sure, it was in Dortington or somewhere like that in Devon, and he talks about this initiatory blow that
Hmm.
creates a man out of a boy. It could be an injury that is given to a boy ceremonially to signify coming into masculinity, into manhood. And it sounds very much like the boxing match was almost taking a blow. It enabled you to come through the facade that was almost smashed with the punch. And then to see, oh, well, hang on a minute, what am I defending here in my puer eterni, having this image and coming through into that sort of, well, actually, what do I actually stand for? Who am I behind the mask, behind, these teenage clothes? This
Yeah.
this trying to keep my youth running, this avoiding growing up, which I would say is really showing up, actually, fully
Yeah.
showing up in your truth, in your masculinity, in your power, and using that truth, masculinity, and power to actually make a difference in the world, to not
Yeah.
deny it and subjugate it, to not intimidate people, but to make it a potency that can can contribute towards society rather than be suppressed under mental health and depression, which is really just these aggressive drives that don't get the initiation and then the ability to actualize and contribute towards society.
You're absolutely right, and that is what's absent is well, it's not entirely absent. There are pockets of it, and it's coming to the fore because it's a conversation that I think people are desperate for. But it is largely absent in terms of understanding it as initiation and making sense of it. And we see it, don't we? I mean, I've got this sort of standing thought about. It's funny how young men like rap music and they like Call of Duty and they like gangster movies and they like Guy Ritchie. They like Guy Ritchie and Tarantino movies where these things are played out, but they just it goes off in a really poor direction because they glamorize horrible things and they miss the point of it's like, okay, we're in that situation now where an initiation and a greatness can take place. Oh, we didn't take it. And it goes around in a circle, doesn't it? And then you end up with, and I'm as guilty of this as the people I'm about to criticize, but you're a man of my age who listened to gangster rap and loved it and fancied himself as a bit of a rapper when he was in his 20s, fuck the police and all that sort of stuff, is now singing that in his family 7-seater because that's the only place his missus will allow to listen to it on his own. And that's what's happened. That's a real sign of this kind of, it's an emasculation, isn't it? It's a denial of masculinity, and it has to take place in the closet of games, music, lads' weekends, wherever. I understand why there is a generalized fear of it, and it's got a bad name. But that said, I really feel it's important for it to come out, to come back to the coming out phrase.
Yeah. So how do we bring through these alpha drives, these aggressive instincts of our, true essence, our true masculinity, in a way where we're not, forbade by the wife and shunted off into the car, the vehicle,
the shed or the man.
Yeah.
And there you have it again, don't you, as a phenomenon in our society. Take that nasty behaviour to your man cave, the car, your lad's weekend away in Lisbon, or wherever, your shed, and this is where it's got to. And again, I understand, quite right too. I don't want some 50-year-old bloke posturing around in a baseball cap in front of my kids. Yeah, send him to his man cave. But what is really going on there, and what might be at stake for him that gets expressed as a fat old rapper rather than as a grand elder?
It's funny that we jest, but look at men like Gary Speed who committed suicide. Look at the amount of isolation amongst men who perhaps don't retain that teenagery, let's all go on a lads' weekend. There's an incredible amount of lost brotherhood and lost masculinity in men. Like you say, we've had our balls cut off. We don't know how to express our wholeness. on all parts of us in society and our relationships. So,
Yeah.
so how can we start to recognize these places, and how can we find safer places to do that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think on the one hand, we shouldn't make it too safe. And, there needs to be enough peril and ordeal. Ordeal is a word that has really come onto my radar recently. I think, a right amount of ordeal is perfect. And, let's face it, life provides that anyway. What is it in the Bible? Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. So you're not going to be without ordeal, are you? And the kind of the man's man of the moment, Jordan Peterson. He's all about that message. Life is tough, man, and you got to make yourself ready for it. And I think he's right, certainly in that department. So
we need friction. We need conflict, healthy conflict, healthy friction.
Absolutely. And, you and I know that from our New Age backgrounds, one of the problems of ordeal in the New Age is that it might not get a masculine expression, might it? It might be very quickly subsumed into some other agenda, your ordeal, or be dressed up as something else. So I don't think it's a very healthy place for the thing we're talking about. And I don't want to dismiss it or undermine it. It has its value, and we've analysed that on a previous conversation, haven't we? Like everything has value, and also it might be missing something. Now, I think it is missing something in the masculinity area, and so your question was like, how do we bring this out? I mean, David, who I'm working with, believes on being an entrepreneur is that expression in the world at the moment. I agree. I agree with him to a massive extent. Oh, you're like a Bond baddie. I can see David now on his lap in our conversation. He's unnerved me a little bit, but maybe that's part of his conversation technique.
It's part of my strategy.
Okay. So yeah, being an entrepreneur might provide you starting your own business, and then you're up against another set of archetypes, aren't you? Like that idiot Alan Sugar, and really tired, sort of the worst value kind of people. Philip Green, you think of being an entrepreneur and you think of all these people who are in really sort of messy, nasty sort of trouble, allegedly. So I think to a certain extent, yes, running your own business, but what does that really mean? What that means is to me, and I'm just reminded of this from, a number of conversations, including the ones we've been having, is the way of the householder. Manning up might be a very prosaic thing. Like in my situation, what I talk about as a family man, as a father, manning up is providing a home and a safe place and a decent environment for the family. That's probably enough, isn't it? And it's quite old-fashioned, and it's not regarded very highly, because a load of people don't even know what that means anymore. I didn't. I've kind of wandered into it quite accidentally. I didn't grow up in a happy family home, and I didn't really understand what that ethic meant. But it's meaning something to me now. And the phrase that has come back, another one that's come back onto the radar, is the way of the householder, which I think is, what would it be, from sort of Hindu origin, an Eastern path of all you need for your spiritual development will be contained in that period where you get married and have kids, and until they leave home. Every spiritual, probably don't need to become a New Ager, because every spiritual lesson and ordeal and breakdown and challenge you ever need for your unfolding will be provided to you in that context. And for everybody, it's different. It's something I'd like to add, and a discomfort I've had, around the real man conversation. I mean, I've created this, really, it's the beginnings of creating something to reach out to men like myself and support them if that's what's appropriate. So you might call it coaching or consultancy or a brotherhood or whatever, and it's just a Patreon project. And I've got this really confrontational landing page at the moment, which says things like, are you man enough to, and one of them is like, stop masturbating. Are you man enough to stop studying pornography? Are you man enough to get your life in order? And one of those things might be, are you man enough to take on the challenge of raising a family and putting food on the table, and something really basic like that? And I also realize, I'd really like to say at this point, because this is an area I know I'm going to be in and out of in this journey, is that also marginalizes a lot of people. because not everyone is in that situation. And I thought immediately of a couple of gay friends of mine. I was thinking, Jesus, if they read this, they're going to think I've I mean, there he is, Munson. He's talking about how he's put the new age behind him, and now he's coming across as some sort of bloody, reinvented alpha male, saying that the family life is the way to become enlightened. I'm saying it's my way. I'm saying it's a way, and I'm interested in the broad church for all real men, whatever their sexuality, whatever their situation, because I think we've all got some real gem to release.
So let's break that down a bit. There's a lot of very good content there. So one of the phrases I'm reminded of in what you just said is when the boys aren't initiated, they burn down the village.
Yes.
And it's like that ardor, that burning passion coming back to that fierce life force in men. How do you bring it into village life so it supports the growth of the village, the health of the village? So that's the first thing that comes through. The second thing, like reflecting back at what you've been talking about, is my experience of the New Age was brilliant for getting me in touch with my softness, my feminine side, my inner boy, and all those really beautiful places that are essential.
Yeah.
But it didn't enable me how to then bring those inner child places into an integrated place of manning up, of growing up, of stepping up, of becoming a householder. They kind of almost mumsied me to keep locked into those places and never emerge. There's such a strong, I would call, distorted mother-child energetic going on in the New Age, where the men maintain this vulnerability that doesn't enable them to grow into integrated men.
Yes.
And it becomes like a manipulative way of interacting to lead on soppy vulnerability that isn't integrated and is actually just another strategy for manipulating others to be caring or to be attentive. Or it's not vulnerability that organismically emerges through one's presence and it's there's a strategy to create an effect. Was my experience. And so when you look at then these men, we go and perhaps we want to find our inner gorilla, or we want to go on a do something like really macho. These places are all clunky, and that we try and bring out our alpha male, but it's not integrated into any holistic place within us.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing from you is it's a really interesting journey how to bring that softness, that vulnerability, that quite often we don't know how to show our women that side because it's not always received and respected. They want to see the strong part of us. They want to see the man who can be in command, in control, not the one who doesn't know what to do and is breaking down. They want our vulnerability, but not necessarily the parts of us that can't cope. And do we bring those to our brothers, to our therapists, our men? Where can we bring these places that we're kind of almost fragmented to?
So much in there. I think there's a failure of brotherhood. I wrote an article recently called, when is it okay to say man up? And I think it's okay to say man up if you provide the support for your brother to man up in. Okay, so and you can punch him in the face if you create a context whereby it's all right to have a scrap and to know that you will still be loved and say anything you want and still be loved and supported. I am by your side. That's the qualification. I think it's probably one of the few qualifications of being able to say to another man, for God's sake, you need to get a grip on man. And that has to come with, yes, you do need to man up, and you have my undying support. I am with you. So that anything you face in that process or anything you're struggling with now that's making me tell you that, I am here with you to support you on that. And then I think that's okay. But it doesn't exist, does it? Where, even with my best friends, I really became aware of that in the last few weeks, that I'm not there for them like that. And I don't know if they're there for me like that. And it's not that they're not. It's just that we've never asked each other that question or demonstrated that to each other. I suspect we probably are. but we don't operate on a knowing of that basis. And it must sometimes probably takes the worst kind of ordeals for that to come. Why would we wait that long? Why don't we create the, you know, the ritual or the process or the understanding, or share the understanding that, like, you know, we are undying brothers, okay, whoever you choose for that, and you commit to it, and then it's the right to say and do just about anything within that particular context. And it's not, you know, we try and do too many things everywhere. If I could sort of qualify that, it's like, you're right that men need space together, because you don't want to be doing that in a Sunday family dinner, do you? You don't want to sort of suddenly bust out that initiation and lean across to your cousin and go, "You need to man up, man. And the reason I'm saying that to you is because I love you so much." And everyone, could you pass the gravy, please? You know, there's got to be a space for it, and we don't have the space, and I don't know if we have the intention, because we don't know we possibly need that at the moment. And I think that maybe just it's like a tide, you know, it's washed out along with all you said about the maleness in the New Age movement. It kind of washed out, and now it's washing back in again steadily, I think. So these questions are being asked. And I've got to, you know, I feel like what you were saying there about, you know, men in the New Age, I've got to apologize to my unreconstituted brothers who I encountered. You know what it's like. You go to, you know, any New Age workshop, and it's a bit sneaky, because you think, this is all right. I'm like one of 3 blokes here, and the other 27 are women, and 6 of them are attractive to me. The rest, like, quite mumsy and nice. The catering's going to be good, and it's going to be a lovely little atmosphere for me to be in a tiny minority of men, of whom I think I'm probably the most attractive here, right? So this is the confessions of a New Ager. Then the other two guys, one's really old, so he's not a competitor, and the other one is my age, but he's a bit of what I think is a bit of an unreconstituted blokey bloke. So I'm thinking, this is great. Every time he opens his mouth, he's going to embarrass himself in this New Agey company, and that's going to make me look even better. What a wanker I am. What a sellout bastard betrayer of my brothers in that situation. And, you know, I can hear it in various courses I've been on, you know, where I've been with guys who didn't know those codes about how to speak the right language, and would come out with what would be sexist, well, what I would judge as sexist comments or sexually inappropriate comments. And they were just being honest. They were just being honest to themselves, and that's how they spoke. And I was judging them, and that's not right. That's a terrible betrayal as I see it now.
Well, the New Age carries so much privilege, and it's just another guy. You know, we've got the white patriarchal male privilege, and then we've got the New Age man who's invested in his vulnerability and can speak the lingo privilege.
Yes,
but it doesn't make you a more integrated man.
No, it makes everything much worse, doesn't it?
And the other point I wanted to draw, because it's kind of similar but different, was this point of how do we connect with each other as men who've got each other's backs, who's men who can give each other that slap and say, "Oh, you just need to pull yourself together and really step up here," in a way and come to blows if necessary, in a way that is part of our love for each other, our brotherhood. And I think as soon as you were talking about that, I got this strike that when we look at our male modeling of fathers, of elders in the community, it's so goddamn negative. Schooling, when we're told off, that when someone gives us that constructive telling off criticism, it's kind of bound up in not only our own personal pain, but like in a whole ancestral line of abuse of the role of the father, of the mentor, of the elder. There's so much goddamn violence where you've had 10 colours of shit kicked out of you, either verbally, emotionally, mentally, you know, physically, that men are really wary about other men who are critical and receiving that criticism, because it literally can open up the most horrific kind of worms and suppressed rage.
As you speak, I'm very aware of that loneliness, and that is at the heart, isn't it, of all that we're hearing about depression and suicide among men. Because I think the worst thing for a man is the idea that he's on his own, that he's out of his brotherhood, out of his tribe, out of his community. And we've seen that as an acceptable punishment for people. The kind of naughty step for men is like, you're on your own. And that's a horrible, horrible thing to do to people, isn't it? It's like the first thing I think you should say to people when they've messed up is like, you're not alone. You're just an idiot. And that would be so much better, wouldn't it? You know, and we've taken that for granted now, that isolating people, you know, and that's the worst. That's supposed to be the worst punishment in prison, isn't it? Solitary confinement. But we do it to everybody all the time in civil life. That's the, you know, like being the word escapes me, but being isolated and being cut off. Yeah, being cut off from everyone else is a punishment we go to far too easily, far too freely, and it's become acceptable. And it's not. It can't. To answer your question. We can't have that as a place where it can go, because, you know, that's what, if your dad says that to you, it's the worst thing in the world, isn't it? It's like, I am not your father anymore. You know, the opposite of Luke, I am your father. The worst thing, the opposite, well, that's a relief. But the worst thing is like, you know, I don't want to be your dad anymore. You're on your own. Now, where can that young man go when he's on his own? It doesn't matter what he does it? He can be the vilest person he wants to be now because he's on his own. What does it matter? And when we cut off, not just in fatherhood, but from each other as brothers, any kind of shame of that level just can't be good for any of us, I don't think.
It is very isolating. And I think of these also in terms of nonviolent communication, and our most basic need is for attention from each other. It's actually more important to a newborn baby to be held than it is to be fed. I mean, they've done experiments with baby monkeys that they'll go towards the mother who gives them cuddles rather than the mother with milk who's cold and harsh.
Yes.
It's that primal to actually want warmth and connection. But as men who carry, I don't think it's just men, I think it's the maleness of society. So women who find themselves doing men's work, like taking on the work as breadwinner and those roles as single women, find themselves very isolated unless they've got those kind of female connections of friends. There's so much loneliness in this society where these parts of us are kind of within our psyche are isolated, usually into these single men who then feel suicidal. And there's such a high incidence of these. We're literally cut off from our juicy bits. We're cut off from our aggressive bits, our rage, our hatred of that abuse of masculine power. And then we have our balls cut off. When those wounds try and raise up and we're triggered, it comes out in absolute violence. So we've got kind of nowhere to turn it apart from these accepted, the Jeremy Clarkson and the stag weekends and the drinking thing and the football fan. We've got like allowed channels, but nothing really truly authentic where we can touch these deeper wounds.
Well, it seems few and far between, doesn't it? What that thing might be, and I think you know, for those of us who recognise that, we've got a responsibility to provide it. And can I say something about this idea of, like, you know, gender and archetype? You know, what is it to be a real man, or what is real masculinity, whether it be in a man or a woman? The reason I'm confining it myself, well, there's two reasons why. I'm sticking with it as very much a gender thing at the moment rather than an archetypal thing, is because it is, I can speak from my own experience better, you know, in exploring this thing of what it is to be a real man. But I also feel I'm not ready to deal with it on an archetypal level. I haven't made enough sense of it myself in my own identity as a man to start the complex conversation of, like, yeah, these same principles can work for women. I agree that I'm sure that's right. And, you know, masculinity and femininity are, you know, the driving poles of everything. But for me, at the moment, it's quite physical work. It's gendered, physically gendered agenda, if you like. It's very much in, you know, in the politically correct speak, men presenting as men, because that's my experience. And that's all I feel comfortable dealing with at the moment. It's too complicated, the extra bit, although I don't deny it for 1 minute.
And how did any of this come out of your project that day in October when you embraced your own darkness. And tell me a bit more about that.
Oh, well, that is it. I mean, that day in October is a moment, hence it being called that day in October. And that day in October, I can't remember the specific day now. It's on that site, but since my 20s, I recognized that being moody wasn't being loving, and you couldn't have it both ways, right? And now I am moving into male and female. This isn't necessarily men's work. I think it's everybody's work. And I could see the truth. And there's a teacher called Barry Long, an Australian spiritual teacher, who's not very popular because he's just so bloody difficult, I think, in what he's putting. He's blunt and frank, and he called himself a teacher of the West, and he didn't pull any punches. Like, for example, you've no right to be unhappy ever is one of his teachings. Now, that's not going to go down very well in many groups at the moment. That's people unhappy just hearing that. But I could see the truth of that in my mid-20s. And an extension of that is like, well, say you love someone, but you pollute your relationship with your foul moods and problems. Now, is that love? And obviously it's not love. It's, it's like, but it happens. Okay. But it happens. And then now I'm 53, and that day in October last month, I was seeing that I was putting a mood on my family. That for 30 years I've been preaching the benefits of not putting bad moods on people, and there I was being a wanker, having a mood on my family, holding on to something. And I just felt like it was the equivalent of wearing a baseball cap and some DJ headphones. Like, come on, you're too old for this. This is not fitting. This is not becoming of a man of my age and what I'm aspiring to in my life, to do that. And I understand it. I also get it that, people have moods. It's culturally acceptable. There's an entitlement to inflicting your bad mood. I mean, that's what Facebook's for, isn't it? Partly it's for inflicting your stuff on people. And I just thought in that moment, I'm going to stop now. I'm going to stop. And I couldn't have done that in my 20s. I couldn't have done it in my 30s. Didn't do it in my 40s. And I'm going to stop now. And that's, with a few other habits that I allude to, which for me, I'm finding a great sense of power in, because it's an intention, it's a declaration. And to me, they are hallmarks of being a grown-up. Or being an adult. I mean, it's got me in so much trouble already, like talking about grown-ups, because people don't want to grow up, and people don't really want to be adults. And I also get that the role model, the prognosis is not great for anyone to grow up or be an adult at the moment.
I think you're using a language, and you're perhaps confusing it with a deeper philosophy that you're also bringing through there. It's not just about growing up; it's about a maturation into eldership and taking full responsibility. Yes. For who you are and what you bring into relationship with yourself and another. Yeah. And I think that you're terming that growing up. Yes. And there's a little bit of an archetypal familial voice that's kind of slightly bringing a tinge of judgment into it. But it's about whether we choose to take full responsibility for ourselves as men and our male drives. And our responsibility is, maybe if you brought a child into the world, what responsibility are you bringing to keeping your role consistent within that, and not abnegating responsibility to your partner, to your child, to earning a living, to being consistent, to contributing to the household, and harnessing all those, those drives of being a wanton teenager, wanking over porn and going on lads' weekends and generally acting, larking around. And how do we incorporate, like you say, an element of that, but bring it the wholeness back into our everyday lives? What does it mean on an everyday basis?
Yeah, well, I totally take your point there, and you probably guessed I take a little bit of delight in using that vocabulary, because it kind of it brings a little bit of excitement and controversy into the mix.
Yeah,
and I'll grow out of that for sure. But at the moment, I quite like it. But the serious part of your question, how does that come about in our daily life, in our communities?
Yeah, how do we bring it into our daily lives, this growing up? You know
We
what?
just got to talk about it, haven't we? You know, and that's me. I'm talking about it in the best way I know how, with a little bit of humor, a little bit of controversy, and some honesty. And I actually like being a little bit confrontational, I suppose, in a weird sort of way. I mean, not directly confrontational, sort of messing with people confrontational, which is really naughty now I say it out loud.
It sounds to me like you're a healthy provocateur when you see something that's stagnant or stuck or old paradigm or socially acceptable that really grates on your sense of truth. You
Yeah.
poke at it, and
Yeah.
like with a fire that's going out and that's become, the dying embers, you poke the hot coals and you chuck on another log of wood, and it creates a bit of an effort for the fire to burn it through. And it strikes me that you have that, that talent for just touching someone where there's some untapped irritation even about their unfulfilled potential. And so that's why it would provoke, maybe trigger people, because you're poking at something that needs to be talked about, that isn't being actualized in majority of the population, and we're asleep on it. It's a nascent issue that we don't even have a language for. We don't even have a context, and you're trying to create sort of you're trying to awaken this sleepiness around something really so simple and yet so crucial.
Well, I'll go with that for sure. And I see it as, it's work in progress as well. It's all going to change. And that's where I feel comfortable at the moment. And part of being deepened myself, or maturing, or it is actually facing what people say. So, on whether it be from those posts, which is a slightly sort of stilted medium, but to answer your question more about how we bring it into being in our own lives and in our brotherhoods, in our neighborhoods, communities, or whatever, it's talking about it, isn't it? And part of the way I talk about it is as you've just described. But I also feel a sense of sort of satisfaction in gaining some level of mastery of difficult conversations as well. I've been practicing that a lot. I like radical honesty. I like nonviolent communication. Going back to Barry Long, he used to call it having an intelligent conversation. So, if you've got some sort of sexual frustration with your partner, you could go into a mood about it, or you could have an intelligent conversation, couldn't you? And that would call to the fore some of the stuff we've talked about from the skills you've learned from a New Age workshop. And that would be exactly in its right place, wouldn't it? It's like, I am owning this. This is what I'm feeling. I feel a bit ridiculous saying it, but this is how I'm honestly feeling sexually, or my problem sexually at the moment is this, and being very frank and honest and owning it and sharing it. And then you've got an intelligent conversation on your hands with someone who you could have put a dark, passive aggressive mood onto for a day, a week, months, whatever, however long that takes. And that is, this is the nascent condition you talk about. As I truly believe people are in that condition where they might have difficult and awkward and an intelligent conversation 3 months ago. They are now splitting up because that didn't happen, or they're living a living hell.
And I think really you're waking up the beast here, because I would call these difficult conversations, conflict conversations, where there's healthy friction. There needs to be frictionized, whatever the right word is, where people need to create some friction and get that passion going. But we live in a world and in a time where we are literally constantly desensitized through sugar, caffeine, alcohol, violence, soap operas, social media, anything other than feel our feelings, dig under our familiar repertoire of kind of fake feelings that keep us just going okay on the surface, but really these deeper, slow moving beasts that come up around sexual tension, like you've mentioned, not being heard, something amongst men where we're not heard, and we're trying to prove ourselves to somebody else. We're trying to, the other person isn't recognizing what our point of view is, because we haven't recognized we haven't heard ourselves, we haven't witnessed ourselves, and always looking to our friend or our sexual partner to be witnessed, to be felt, to be here, because we're not feeling our deeper feelings. We're so desensitized. We don't even know what they are. They're buried. I can speak from personal experience and wanting the whole world to hold me and hear me, whereas actually I'm not hearing me. How on earth can the world meet me in what I'm feeling if I don't know what it is? If I'm not taking the time to find those places and meet with them.
Well, therein lies another part to the question you answered, is finding the time, isn't it? Is making the effort. I don't see any substitute for that, and that, to me, that is a masculine thing. Is this the principle of action, isn't it? Of like going to work on yourself. It's more acceptable. It's better known for men to go to work on each other or things, but why not turn that masculine male energy on yourself? Which I don't mean destructively necessarily, or destructively in bits that are arguably need destroying or transforming, to put it a better way. That would be a pretty good use of one's male energy, right? To turn it inward and to see what you're saying there, which is like, I don't even know what I don't know about myself, and I'm sure as hell not going to find out if I just keep running around the place, causing the same old dramas that I cause periodically and I'm very well practiced in. You gotta go to work on yourself at some point, haven't you? You gotta be manly to yourself and say, okay, enough now, stop, and just sort of like punch yourself in the face and say, okay, and also, I am not going to leave you. This is coming back to the same thing. I am my own brother. Yeah. I love you, man. I love you. I love myself. I love you enough to give you some shit now, which is man yourself up. And yeah, that would be another way, wouldn't it? Turn that inside, take the time, make the effort.
Yes, maybe in a slightly same but different way. When we've done that work to not abandon those places in ourselves, we can make connections with others and agreements that we won't abandon them. And we have ways to withdraw and take care of ourselves, but not cut the relationship off in order to avoid that place in ourselves that conflict is touching, or that lack of being met in our needs is touching that place in us that's just too painful. Yeah. And so it's finding ways to build that self-awareness and also those agreements with others about how we navigate those difficult places.
Indeed. I mean, you're doing something along that line, aren't you? I mean, the circles you're talking about, these are vital places, aren't they? The meeting place with that particular intention, whether it's, if you can't manage it locally, God knows we've got the technology to do it now. People of a similar intention to get together, to open the can of worms, to stay supportive and be an accountability with each other. What a great time to be alive, that we could actually do that if we could be bothered.
And so how can people involve themselves further with you, your work, your projects? Tell us, as we're coming towards the close, tell us a little bit more about how people can get involved with you in your different projects.
I'd really like to hear what people have to say and talk to people. So the carlmunson.com, thatdayinoctober.com is the beginnings of this conversation. And I would like to make myself available to people who are in the same place. But also, I'd like the help of people who've been in the same place and have mastered it. So it's a community, it's resources, and it is an offer of help and an invitation for help with this particular focus of being a real man. And then, and all the conversations that spin out and spin off from that. It's very new, but I feel really strongly and really engaged with that. That theme or seam or whatever it is, that concept.
Because you've just issued this very short podcast taster with a friend of yours. You got a good masculine bond, and I thought that was absolutely first class exploration into bonded men talking about what actually makes you trust another man. How do you know you can trust someone? What are the necessary steps and things?
Yeah. Well, there's another thing people can do, right? That particular conversation you referred to came from making an effort, because he's my childhood friend. We met because we had a fight, funnily enough. We had a scrap, a school entrance exam, and then we became friends when we've met each other, because we both managed to get into this school together, and then we became friends and, like, you know, co-conspirators in our own terrible education. And then he went off to live in Australia, and so I said to him yesterday, we only really exist as like ideas to each other. We don't talk often enough. And then, so I had reason to ring him because he was helping me with some homework I'd been set to speak to someone who knows you well about your future plans, which is a great piece of homework. It gave me a reason to ring him and ask him and request that of him. But before we got around to that, you heard what he was just rambling on and on about, because I'd mentioned masculinity and maleness and stuff. He started riffing, didn't he, on what he thought. He had to get it off his chest, didn't he? And it was really interesting because we had these, the setting of it was that I'm sat at my desk in the daylight, all business-like, and he's sprawled out on his sofa, half cut, I think, on a nice New World wine. So we've also got that dynamic going on as well. And some real gems, I think, came from that. And you're right, the key to that was bondedness, wasn't it? We do have a brotherhood, undying brotherhood, which we don't really call upon very much. But when we do, beautiful things like that come out of the conversation. Mm. And I urge, other men to do that. Like, reach out to your brothers who you take for granted and who you've got all your judgments about. They're still the best ones you've got. And speak to them and take it a little bit deeper and a little bit further. And I suspect the results will be favorable and fulfilling and useful invariably. They won't always be, but that's life.
Brilliant. Well, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today, Carl. Thanks very much for your time.
I really appreciate it. And can I say to you, David is the man who has helped me understand that I've been hiding behind the microphone for a long time. I've just concluded something called the Barefoot Broadcast. David was the last auspicious interview of the Barefoot Broadcast. I've come out from behind the mic, and I'm delighted to be asked, and really grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it, so that I can own it and share it and see if anyone else is interested, rather than being in that hiding place in production.
And I'd very much, advise and recommend any listener to really tap into Carl, because he does open up conversations. He's provocative in a supportive way, and it's really enlivening, and he's a great listener. I think that's possibly what makes you also a great interviewer, is you really deeply listen, and there's some sort of magical alchemy that happens to the person who's doing the speaking with you. So I'm sure that will translate into the groups and these further conversations that you have around this masculinity topic. It's really, really necessary and important.
Oh, it's lovely to hear. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.